Peace. This is part 2. I am SHU AMUN RA, and this segment we be playing videos stating about where the Jehovah's Witnesses came from. In the first one, I broke down where the reason why Jehovah's Witnesses at the time didn't have black people, according to their records, basically saying that Ham was cursed by Noah. But you know what? When you read the Bible, it wasn't the way you thought it was. Because when you look out the records and you read the Bible, I don't throw no books away. I don't believe in that. According to the Bible, it doesn't really tell you Ham's descendants was slaves. Where they were slaves at? Because it looks like to me the Hebrew Israelites, the Hebrews don't come from Ham. Do they? Because Ham comes from the land of Canaan. He's supposed to be the father of Canaan. Also Cush. C-U-S-H. Cush. But if you continue reading on, you go all the different names that Ham's supposed to be the father of. Now, what we're going to do today, because the Jehovah's Witnesses supposed to start it in 1872. Important information needs to get out. But the things I show you, the videos, I want you to listen. But I also want you to catch certain things. You're going to see certain things, how they modify it in modern times, and how they used to be. Okay, let's get ready. Before we go in, let's go pay all due respects to the Creator. The sun rises. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Amun. Let's go in. Now remember, it's not about disrespecting Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not about that. It's about understanding why black people are so indulged into this religion and how we got there. Maybe they might not even tell us. But here we go.
Around the world, there are estimated to be thousands of different Christian denominations, with Catholics alone making up more than 1 billion adherents. And while all of these denominations have different beliefs about aspects of Christianity, none are quite as well known for their unique views as the Jehovah's Witnesses. You yourself may have even been visited by one on your doorstep. But what exactly sets Jehovah's Witnesses apart, and what do they believe? Well, unlike Christianity as a whole, the Jehovah's Witnesses were founded relatively recently, in the late 1800s, just about 40 years after Mormonism got its start. The founder was Charles Taze Russell, a biblical scholar who, like other religious founders, had his own interpretation of the Bible. Russell would say that the world was soon coming to an end and expressed this and other thoughts in a journal called The Watchtower. Supporters of Russell would meet to study the Bible and eventually became a small religious ministry. After Russell's death, the group was taken over by a high-ranking member and former judge, Joseph Franklin Rutherford. Rutherford made a number of failed predictions, including that the biblical Abraham and Isaac would be resurrected in 1925. This eventually forced a split in the ministry in 1931. The remaining group was led by Rutherford and renamed the Jehovah's Witnesses, operating out of Brooklyn, New York. Today, Jehovah's Witnesses claim to have roughly 8 million adherents worldwide, or publishers as they're called. And yet, most people know very little about the religion's unique views. For one, it's taught that Satan was thrown out of heaven and came to earth around October 1st, 1914, and that Armageddon would occur during the lives of those living in 1914. The door-to-door proselytizing for which Jehovah's Witnesses are famous for is in part based on the urgency of this end-of-times prophecy. But in 1995, when it was clear that most of the people alive in 1914 were dying, the prophecy was officially revised to have no clear end date. Jehovah's Witnesses also deny Trinitarianism, which is the Christian belief that God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are one entity. Instead, they believe that Jesus, being the Son of God, is a lesser entity and call the Trinity a form of pagan idolatry. Along those lines, they also don't celebrate birthdays or any non-Christian holidays, seeing them also as pagan. Jehovah's Witnesses stress that the only date to be commemorated is the death of Jesus. They don't even celebrate his birth, Christmas. In 1945, it was established that witnesses could not give or receive blood transfusions based on a unique reading of a Bible passage, calling blood itself sacred. However, it's not all alternative beliefs. There's also a strong emphasis on cleanliness, both physical and spiritual, manifesting as honesty and modesty. While these are inherent in many religions, they're especially paramount for Jehovah's Witnesses. Between believing the world is about to end, never celebrating a birthday, and not being allowed to receive blood in a life or death situation, the Jehovah's Witnesses are an interesting group with some very unique beliefs. Another religious group often compared to Jehovah's Witnesses and stemming from roughly the same recent time period are Mormons. Mormons wield considerable influence in the United States, and in the 2012 election, Mormon Mitt Romney nearly became president. So just how powerful is the Mormon Church?
Brigham Young led a significant number of Mormons to Salt Lake City in Utah.
Now, brothers and sisters, kings and queens, what I'm about to establish here is for you to understand something. That what you just seen was a small information about the Jehovah's Witness. They didn't get into details, okay? And I thought it was like maybe 500, 600,000, but millions of Jehovah's Witnesses around the world. But my whole key point is how many black people. I don't care about everybody else. No disrespect. How many black melanated people from the darker race, from the mulattoes, the criollos, and the light skin. That is my whole purpose, to find out why do black people generate themselves to become a Jehovah's Witness. And most of them didn't even try to do any research about this organization. I know my mother didn't. My father didn't. I'm gonna tell you what my belief is. My opinion on the short term. It was an easy religion to get into. Because they came with peace, unity, and love. And said we all supposed to be equal. We all should have love. But that was not the case. Sometimes what you think you see on the outside is not really is in the inside. Because you can't stop people the way they feel about you. First of all, if you became a Jehovah's Witness in Alabama or Mississippi, hypothetically, then you know a lot of those people are racist in certain towns. So if they became Jehovah's Witnesses and then they moved here east and started living, let's say, hypothetically, in New York City. So now you got this possibility, racist person who claimed to be righteous all of a sudden, claimed to be. But behind, deep in his soul, if someone said something out of the ordinary that he or she is not familiar with, you can see their temper come out, even though they're controlling it. I used to see that a lot in the 70s. And I'm not saying it just to be mean, I'm being real. It ain't always what you think it is. Trust me. But what I want to show you is this. You got the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, why they are similar alike. There's a reason why. What they don't tell you is a lot of those guys, they all were together. Let's get into that. I want to show you some clips. Okay, here we go.
To begin this story, we must go back to the 1800s. William Miller had begun a movement that became known as the Adventist movement or Millerite movement around the early mid-1800s and predicted the return of Christ visibly on 3 occasions during the year 1844. After this disappointment, the group split up into several new movements. 2 of those are known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Advent Christian Church. In 1871, Nelson H. Barber, who had previously been associated with the Millerites, published his view on the matter, stating that Christ would return visibly in 1873. When this failed, he pushed the date to 1874. When Christ failed to appear once more, instead of admitting his error, he began teaching that his return had been invisible. He purportedly based his new conclusion on his findings in Benjamin Wilson's The Emphatic Diaglott Translation of the New Testament, noticing in it that at Matthew 24, the word the King James Version rendered coming is translated presence. Charles Taze Russell was born on February 16, 1852, in Old Allegheny, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was the second son of Joseph L. Russell and Anne Eliza Burney. He was originally raised a Presbyterian. When Russell was 16 years old and a member of the Congregational Church in 1868, he found himself losing faith. He had begun to doubt not only the church creeds and doctrines, but also God and the Bible itself. At this critical juncture, a chance encounter restored his faith and placed him under the influence of Second Adventist preacher Jonas Wendell. For some years after that, Russell continued to study Scripture with and under the influence of various Adventist laymen and clergy, notably Advent Christian Church minister George W. Stetson and the Bible Examiner's publisher George Storrs. From 1870, he met locally on a regular basis with a small circle of friends to discuss the Bible, and this informal study group came to regard him as their leader or pastor. In January 1876, when he was 23 years old, Russell received a copy of The Herald of the Morning, an Adventist magazine published by Nelson H. Barber of Rochester, New York. One of the distinguished features of Barber's group at that time was their belief that Christ returned invisibly in 1874, and this concept presented in the Herald captured Russell's attention. Although the idea appealed to young Charles Taze Russell, the reading public apparently refused to buy the story of an invisible second coming, with the result that Nelson H. Barber's publication, The Herald of the Morning, was failing financially. In the summer of 1876, wealthy Russell paid Barber's way to Philadelphia and met with him to discuss both beliefs and finances. Russell became the magazine's financial backer and was added to the masthead as an assistant editor. He contributed articles for publication as well as monetary gifts, and Russell's small study group likewise became affiliated with Barber's. Together, Russell and Barber jointly published 3 Worlds and Harvest of This World. Russell and Barber believed and taught that Christ's invisible return in 1874 would be followed soon afterwards, in the spring of 1878, by the rapture, the bodily snatching away of believers to heaven. When this expected rapture failed to occur, the Herald's editor, Mr. Barber, came up with new light on this and other doctrines, like the rejection of the ransom sacrifice. Russell, however, rejected some of the new ideas. Finally, Russell quit the staff of the Adventist magazine and started his own. He called it Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence, and published its first issue July 1879. At this point, Charles Russell continued to view William Miller and Nelson Barber as instruments chosen by God to lead his people in the past. The formation of a distinct denomination around Russell was a gradual development. His immediate break was not with Adventism, but with the person and policies of Nelson H. Barber. Russell traveled about.
Now, brothers and sisters, gods and goddesses, kings and queens, Charles Dash Russell, he had no pinnacle of having any black people in the Kingdom Hall. It wasn't even called the Kingdom Hall. Remember, if you do your research and understand this organization only been on the planet for 140 some years, the Jehovah's Witness. What you just seen was a video, a documentary put together to show you how they transformed in the years. 1852, Charles Dash was born. 1868, he lost faith. He was losing faith until he ran into another minister that probably talked him back into it. Obviously, 1870, he met a study group, but as you see in the study group, there wasn't no black people in none of those groups. No black people was in those groups. 1874, when it was announced that Jesus the Christ was coming in the flesh, that didn't happen. So you supposed to prophesy. You prophesied that Jesus was coming from the sky. And that didn't happen. Now guess what happens next? You lose faith. People ain't gonna be like, I'm not believing in you. Those was all white folks. White folks was like, wait a minute, what you talking about? They came to see Jesus. Then they took advantage of. Not yet, let me rewind. 1876. In 1876, when he started to move around and he started finding out that he started changing their belief system. Because if you got in 1874 that Christ is coming in the flesh and Christ never showed up, now the people around you is like, yo, you phony. You fugazi. You're full of it, right? Now, not only just in 1876, they was having problems financially because it takes enough people to start the ball rolling for your organization to really start to grow. Okay? You just can't do it by yourself unless you're rich. And even if you're rich, it's gonna eat your money up. Now, in 1878, they flipped it. Instead of saying Jesus is coming back in the flesh, which is visible, they said Jesus is coming back invisible. And invisible, he will take people from the rapture and bring them up to heaven. This is what they were stating. The prophesy. They prophesied this. Well, that also failed. Still, no black people. So, Jesus coming invisible in 1878. Jesus is supposed to come visible in 1874. It never happened. But in 1878, you're going to say they're going to make claims, the prophecies, that Jesus is coming invisible. The rapture is going to pull people up to heaven, which never happened. So now Charles decides he needs to change something up. Understand what's going on. He believed in the Bible, they reading it, but they only reading it to what they believe. How they interpret the Bible. Understand this. This is why religion is dangerous. Because men, when they read the Bible, they can interpret it the way they want. You understand? And when they interpret what they want, they get enough people to believe in the same philosophy, When they believe in the same philosophy, then they begin to believe so deeply, so rooted, so institutionalized, then they want to spread this message, talking about let's save the world. But you wasn't saving black people. Nah. This is why I don't understand why black people, they are diehard fans. They believe in this religion, and 90% of them did not do their research. But they so believing in God, they go, well, what they did in the past was wrong, so we must forgive them. Are you crazy? We also need to dive into some of these names and find out why black people was not in the Jehovah's Witness in the beginning. We need to find out. So hold on, y'all. And what I'm gonna do, y'all, I'm gonna continue showing you more description about Jehovah's Witness. But we got to get in definitions about, where black people come from, why they indulge into this religion, and why was it so important to them to do it. Because like I told you, my mother's still a Jehovah's Witness now. I discuss these same things to her. You could, when I speak to my mother, you can see in her eyes that it's a possibility that she made something wrong. But I told my mother, don't worry about that. Concentrate on the Creator. It's not man you're supposed to worry about. It's the Creator. If you feel the Creator in you, don't worry about it. A lot of things you think you know from they taught you is wrong. Because all of a sudden, their religion is the only way you can go, the only way you could be divine through their religion only? Do that make sense? Only the way of Jehovah? Really? So you talk about thousands of people, even I'm talking about Noah and his 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Josepheth. So all his sons and people are forth, and this is why you here? So everybody should die, never come back, only because the Jehovah's Witnesses, they are the true religion? Are you mad? Unbelievable. Well, let's get into this here real quick. We're going to get deep in here.
Bible, and this informal study group came to regard him as their leader or pastor. In January 1876, when he was 23 years old, Russell received a copy of The Herald of the Morning, an Adventist magazine published by Nelson H. Barber of Rochester, New York. One of the distinguished features of Barber's group at that time was their belief that Christ returned invisibly in 1874, and this concept presented in the Herald captured Russell's attention. Although the idea appealed to young Charles Taze Russell, the reading public apparently refused to buy the story of an invisible second coming, with the result that Nelson H. Barber's publication, The Herald of the Morning, was failing financially. In the summer of 1876, wealthy Russell paid Barber's way to Philadelphia and met with him to discuss both beliefs and finances. Russell became the magazine's financial backer and was added to the masthead as an assistant editor. He contributed articles for publication as well as monetary gifts, and Russell's small study group likewise became affiliated with Barber's. Together, Russell and Barber jointly published 3 Worlds and Harvest of This World. Russell and Barber believed and taught that Christ's invisible return in 1874 would be followed soon afterwards, in the spring of 1878, by the rapture, the bodily snatching away of believers to heaven. When this expected rapture failed to occur, the Herald's editor, Mr. Barber, came up with new light on this and other doctrines, like the rejection of the ransom sacrifice. Russell, however, rejected some of the new ideas. Finally, Russell quit the staff of the Adventist magazine and started his own. He called it Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence and published its first issue July 1879. At this point, Charles Russell continued to view William Miller and Nelson Barber as instruments chosen by God to lead his people in the past. The formation of a distinct denomination around Russell was a gradual development. His immediate break was not with Adventism, but with the person and policies of Nelson H. Barber. Russell traveled about speaking from the pulpits of Protestant churches as well as to gatherings of his own followers. In 1879, the year of his marriage to Maria Frances Ackley, and also the year he began publishing Zion's Watchtower, Russell organized some 30 study groups or congregations scattered from Ohio to the New England coast. Each local class or ecclesia came to recognize him as pastor. Inevitably, Russell's increasingly divergent teachings forced his followers to separate from other church bodies and to create a denomination of their own. Beginning as he did in a small branch of Adventism that went to the extreme of setting specific dates for the return of Christ and the rapture, Russell went farther out on a limb in 1882 by openly rejecting the doctrine of the Trinity. His earlier mentor, Nelson H. Barber, was a Trinitarian, as was the Herald of the Morning's other assistant, John H. Patton, who joined Russell in leaving Barber to start Zion's Watchtower. The writings of Barber and Patton that Russell had helped publish or distribute were Trinitarian in their theology. And the Watchtower itself was at first vague and non-committal on the subject. It was only after Patton broke with him in 1882 and ceased to be listed on the masthead that Russell began writing against the doctrine of the Trinity. In 1881, William Henry Conley was the first president of Zion's Watchtower Tract Society. At that time, the operations were situated at 101 Fifth Avenue, was used until 1884. In 1884, they moved to 151 Robinson Street, earlier designated as 44 and then 40 Federal Street, Allegheny, Pennsylvania. In December 15, 1884, the society was incorporated with Charles Taze Russell as president and became the legal corporation used by the International Bible Students. In 1886, Russell went on to publish a series of books called Studies in the Scriptures, in which he taught his beliefs and strange Bible chronology using pyramidology and the inch-per-year rule, in which he measured the interior passages of the Great Pyramid in pyramid inches to predict dates of future and past biblical events. In 1896, the society was renamed Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. In 1889, a four-story brick building at 5860 Arch Street, Allegheny, was completed. Valued at $34,000, it was known as the Bible House. It served as the society's headquarters for approximately 20 years. Russell also believed in phrenology, a theory which claimed to be able to determine character, personality traits, and criminality on the basis of the shape of the head by reading bumps and cavities. He claimed that at the restoration of all things, when God's kingdom would be established on the earth, people of darker skin tones would be restored to a lighter skin tone.
Now, what I'm about to show you is where Russell believed that black people was going to turn light skin. They're going to turn white. And stating that, he's saying that blacks is going to turn white because this is where God believes that black people is going to turn white. Are you ready? I'm going to show you again. I want y'all to see this. I want y'all to hear it.
When God's kingdom would be established on the earth, people of darker skin tones would be restored to a lighter skin tone, which was originally intended by God at the creation. In 1906, he claimed to be God's mouthpiece.
Shall I show you that video again? Matter of fact, I'm I'm gonna show you that video again. That small little clip that Charles Dash claimed that God intended for dark-skinned people to become light-skinned people, and it was all part of his plan. Hold on. Let me show that video one more time. Please pay attention. Just pay attention.
Claimed that at the restoration of all things, when God's kingdom would be established on the earth, people of darker skin tones would be restored to a lighter skin tone, which was originally intended by God at the creation.
Now, this man claimed that God, the creator of all things, supposed to take black people, make them into white folks. What that tell you? What do that tell you? He don't mention nobody else but the darker race, that they gonna become light and become white because this is part of God's creation. And all you niggas, you tell me you ain't see this documentary? You ain't see this information because you ain't do your research. How he basically saying you gonna be white. You gonna be white. All those African people, all those indigenous people around the world, supposed to turn white. I see y'all in part 3. Because what I'm throwing down at you, if you don't got that, something wrong with you.